Welcome back to the Lehocky Eagles postgame show live from Ocean Casino. You're watching us on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel and also 6abc.com. I'm Mike Missinelli with Derek Gunn and Seth Joyner. And joining us right now for a little explanation on some injuries that may have happened in this game, the Nakobe Dean foot injury being the most prominent. Dr. Bruce Grossinger joins us. Hello, Dr. Bruce.
Good to see you, Mike. How you doing tonight?
Good to see you. Okay, when he leaves in a boot, what does that mean for the in the overall scope here?
Well, it could really be a variety of different things. Hopefully it's precautionary. If we look statistically, it's most likely a foot strain, but the foot has many different aspects. For instance, there are toe injuries, toe fractures, the dreaded Liz Frank, the Deuce Staley injury. It didn't look like an Achilles tear, something I've experienced myself, not fun, because he was able to walk off the field. He did have a history of a prior ankle strain 4 years ago, but I think it's precautionary. They'll be doing x-rays and MRIs, then we'll know more tomorrow.
What is the likelihood that he bounces back enough to play Thursday?
I think very unlikely. Even if he has a grade 1 foot strain, that would be a 2 to 3 week on average injury. So regrettably, they're short an inside linebacker. They have Zach Cunningham and they've got Ellis. So I'm fearful with the short week. I don't think it's likely that he'll play. I don't think he can turn it around that fast.
Doc, when you're talking about a foot strain, what does that exactly mean, a strain, more so than a sprain?
Well, we talk a lot about where it is. You know, for instance, the midfoot is a place where Liz Frank ligaments can be stretched but not torn. We also have plantar fasciitis. I'm sure Seth could relate to that, playing some of the years in the league, where you could really injure and stretch the plantar fascia, which is at the heel, and that's something that's painful. That's another kind of 2 or 3 week injury. You hope that it's not a Liz Frank. There's something called a Jones fracture, which is a 5th metatarsal fracture, non-weight bearing. People can actually have a fracture. You can tape it up and come back 2 to 4 weeks later. So right now, there's a lot of speculation because all we know is he injured his right foot. He's in a boot, so it gives a broad differential diagnosis.
Doc, I feel for him because, you know, I know from experience, when you have an injury like this, a lot of times this type of injury could plague him for the remainder of the season. You know, it's not going to be a situation where he's ever going to be 100% because, you know, what happens in the National Football League, guys, is that, you know, once you get through training camp, whatever little injuries and little nicks that you get in training camp in the beginning of the season, they kind of shadow you through the entire year. And the hardest thing in the world is to like train yourself to get in tip-top shape to play, and then all of a sudden you get an injury, and if he's going to be out 3 weeks, you know, his condition is going to suffer. You know, atrophy is going to set in certain places in his body, especially if he's got to wear that boot for, you know, a week or more. All of these things contribute to, you know, it meaning that he's going to be affected by this thing all year long, and therefore he's going to be, you know, rendered less effective than what we probably anticipated him to be.
Yeah.
It's sad.
I guess a really good example is Avonte Maddox. Last year he had a turf toe. The most common is the great toe. And for somebody like a cornerback or somebody who has to accelerate, and certainly Nakobe is a high burst, you know, fast twitch kind of a guy, really that plagued Avonte the whole year, even through the playoffs. And that was a turf toe, and it got better and worse, and that's certainly the differential diagnosis.
When you're looking at from the doctor's standpoint and orthopedic standpoint, when you're looking at a game, what do you look for as far as injuries popping up? How do you view a game from your vantage point, which is like more than a fan? You're a guy who's looking at people getting crunched out there.
Yeah, well, I guess we were watching Blankenship today. We were watching together, and you just see him literally get crunched. You saw him slide to make a tackle. He was down a little bit, and you wonder, he could have injured his shoulder, could have been a slight concussion. Luckily, he popped right back up. He might have had the wind knocked out of him. We remember last year, Josh Sweat, he was down, and we didn't know whether it was a concussion or a stinger. And when I interviewed him at the Super Bowl, he said, Bruce, it wasn't a concussion, it was just a neck. I said, Josh, we couldn't tell because we looked at you and you were down and you weren't moving. So I try to differentiate. I try to also watch the replays and also try to use my knowledge of treating people, especially now hoping that it's just a strain, hoping it's not a Liz Frank, and it doesn't look like an Achilles tear. That's the worst thing. The Achilles tear would be being out for a year. And the fact he walked off, I think it's very less likely to be an Achilles tear.
Did you see anything else out there that resembled any kind of an injury of guys getting nicked up?
Not really.
We looked at Zach Cunningham. It looked like maybe he got nicked up at one point.
Yeah, I would say it looked like a little nick. At the end, Bradbury, I thought he was just taking a little extra time. It might have been a cramp. But sometimes players, and Fletcher Cox especially, sometimes at the end of the game they might go down, they'll be out of play. And so that is hard to distinguish from an injury. But when you see a walk-off, and they, with Fletcher, he's very good at doing that. And Bradbury seemed to walk off. So a lot is if they don't look at the tent, let's say no, there's so many medical people out there. So if nobody even approaches them, then I kind of infer that it's not a bad injury.
Doc, I don't want to make too much of this, but something that we should keep looking out for. Go back to training camp when Nolan Smith jokingly said, hey, sometimes my shoulder works, sometimes it doesn't work. We also saw them keep Nolan Smith out of practices in training camp for like 4 consecutive days. It's the problem he had when he was playing at Georgia. So with that said, what are we looking for? What should we be looking for with this shoulder? Is it just one of those things? We always talk about athletes who have fingers once they've dislocated them. They're susceptible to popping in and out. There you go. Popping in and out.
That's ice hockey right there.
So what are we looking at when we're talking about a Nolan Smith type shoulder situation?
Well, I guess the best word we could say is laxity. So as shoulders, they're especially in an athlete, there's a little laxity. So at times, I'm sure you've experienced where you pick up a heavy weight, you can just feel a slight movement. Yeah. So I believe that's a little extra laxity, and he's got to work hard in keeping it tight. There's a way to do that with power bands and stretching and different things. So I think it's not a full dislocation, but there's a little laxity. There's a little play in the shoulder, and I've heard athletes describe that. That's the best I can say. Yeah. It's something you can play through. It's almost as if you have a gate that's a little loose, but the door doesn't fly off.
Okay, all right.
All right, that is Dr. Bruce, always reliable with some great injury news. Nakobe Dean probably is not going to play Thursday, which puts the Eagles in a really precarious position at that linebacker side. We're going to come back. We're going to review this game from quarter one on, because there's a lot of things we need to look at in this game and how the Eagles pulled this off and survived a 25-20 victory in New England today. It is the Lehocky Eagles postgame show live from Ocean Casino, and we're back after this.